Each day, thousands moved freely between the Soviet and Western sectors. Berlin's open border gave East Germans access to the glittering West, which Soviet and East German leaders wanted to end.
West-Berlin immer gefährlicher wurde für die Existenz der DDR und damit auch für die Existenz des Sozialismus. Und daraus
West Berlin was becoming increasingly dangerous to the existence of the GDR and the existence of socialism.
Every month, thousands of East Germans fled across the open Berlin border and took refuge in the West. Most refugees were young and skilled. Their departure was bleeding the East German economy to death. On August the 12th, Soviet and East German forces were mobilized.
At 23 hours, we were given our orders and told that at 24 hours, the border with West Berlin would be closed by military force. All the soldiers were fully armed. The People's Militia had automatic pistols and machine guns, any weapons they could get hold of.
By early morning, East German troops were ready, lined up in battle order along the sector border. It was Berlin's last hour as one city. On the morning of Sunday, August 13th, Berliners woke to find a divided city. Teams of workers under armed guards started erecting a barbed wire barrier through the center.
Khrushchev, preparing to this event, would have done everything to minimize, or rather to prevent, any military conflict between us and the United States.
The barrier split Berlin. Families were torn apart.
Die Menschen waren ganz anders drüben. Haben zwar geschimpft auf uns.
The people were swearing at us. We felt we were simply doing our duty, but we were getting scolded from all sides. The West Berliners yelled at us, and the Eastern demonstrators yelled at us. We were standing there in the middle. There was the barbed wire, there were us guards, West Berliners, East Berliners. For a young person, it was terrible.
The anger of West Berliners boiled over. They demonstrated against the division of their city. They could not believe that the Western Allies would allow the barriers to remain. The demonstrations continued, but the West offered little protest.
Nobody was quite sure what to do about the subject, what exactly was the scope of it. The focus of all of the planners had been on the threat, the possible necessity of having to take military action to block a Soviet move on Berlin. And here, suddenly, everybody was relieved to find out that the Soviets had found a way to resolve their problem with the refugees in a way that did not affect Allied rights.
For the Allies, the closed border stabilized the tense Berlin situation. It was ordinary Berliners and their families who paid the price. In East Berlin, one soldier saw his last chance to escape.
Dann war die 14 Uhr, habe ich meine Gruppe eingeteilt.
At 2 o'clock, I assigned tasks to my soldiers. I was in front, and I spread the others out so that it wouldn't look suspicious. Nobody noticed anything. From 2 until 4 o'clock, I was thinking about the situation and wondering what was the right decision. I would have to leave my parents and my sister. Finally, I took the decision. I jumped over the barbed wire at 4 o'clock. Then I was in the West, and they received me with a great cheer. I was the first.
3 days later, concrete blocks began to replace the barbed wire. Along the sector boundaries rose the Berlin Wall, carving the city in two. In West Berlin, morale was low. Confidence in Allied protection crumbled. Mayor Willy Brandt sent an angry letter to President Kennedy demanding action. In the east, people risked death to flee through the last chinks in the barrier. Where the border ran down the middle of the street, windows overlooked the west. Helping people escape became a routine assignment for West Berlin's fire brigade.
Nachher so, das spielte sich so ein, dass
Here are perhaps the most dramatic scenes ever to come out of Berlin. Tossing belongings from the window of an apartment overlooking the western border and freedom, an escapee is prepared to jump to safety into a net held by police and firemen of West Berlin. A rescue episode that is even more extraordinary. An attempt is being made by sympathetic Germans to assure the escape of a brave woman. While communist police try to pull her back through the window, below there is freedom's grip, a blood-chilling sequence that the News of the Day camera follows to its dramatic conclusion. She's safe at last.
The East Germans blocked even this last loophole. People swam lakes and canals, clung under trains, hid in cars, climbed barriers under fire. Hundreds failed. Many died. Despite the human suffering, East Germany justified the wall as a bulwark of peace.
I learned early in the game of dealing with the Russians, the Russians understand one thing, and that's force, that's strength. You must never negotiate or deal with the Russians without having a position of strength.
To underline his point, Clay moved tanks up to the checkpoint. The Russians brought up their tanks and guns. The two sides faced each other barrel to barrel.
The dead seriousness of it became more intense with each hour. The Western forces went on alert, Strategic Air Command went on alert, NATO went on alert, troops were being cranked up around the world, and one never knew if the intensity of the situation in Berlin escalated, where would be the next sore point. The lead Soviet tank cranked up his engine and backed up some 5 or 10 meters, and we received instructions to have the American tanks to withdraw exactly the same distance.
It wasn't a good enough reason to start a war. Khrushchev himself said, "We're not unleashing a third world war because of Berlin." The Americans realized that too.
The soldiers pulled back, but the wall remained. The East Germans built it higher and backed it with fences, tripwires, and tank traps. During the first year, 50 Germans died trying to cross to the west. One of them was 18-year-old Peter Fechter.
The Americans gathered, the soldiers gathered on one side, not doing anything. And on the other side, the GDR, the Vorpost, the police there, was standing on their side, not doing anything. And this young man was huddled. I remember he was lying like an S shape. And first he screamed, he cried, he shouted for help. And as the hours went on, his voice got weaker and weaker. It was so heart-rending that in the middle of nowhere was a human being dying, and two groups was facing each other, too worried to act because they didn't know what the other one was going to do.